William Faulkner cast one of the biggest shadows of any author in Southern literature. Influenced by few, yet influential to many, Faulkner shifted the paradigm of American literature by introducing a new stylistic approach to writing and by inventing one of the most detailed, realistic fiction worlds in modern literature with his Yoknapatawpha County. Born in New Albany, Mississippi in 1897, William Faulkner's childhood was marked by his Southern roots. His great-grandfather and namesake, William Clark Faulkner, was somewhat of a local legend, and hearing stories about him instilled an interest in the social and historical workings of the Old South in young William. The women in his family encouraged his pursuit of education by teaching him an appreciation for literature and poetry. Another powerful influence in Faulkner's childhood was his mammy, a black woman named Caroline Barr, who raised him and remained loyal to the Faulkner family until her death. Her presence in his life throughout his childhood proved to be the impetus for his interest in the conflicts of race, gender, and sexuality in the Old South. Faulkner began to experiment with writing by the age of 12, mimicking the poetry of English Romantic authors. He continued to write strictly poetry until 1925, when he published his first novel entitled Soldier's Pay. When he was 17, he met Philip Stone, a man who would become his close mentor and friend, often working to send his work to publishers. Partially influenced by James Joyce and Sherwood Anderson, Faulkner published his first two novels in 1925. 2 years later, he wrote his first novel set in the imaginary Yoknapatawpha County, entitled Sartoris. Difficulty getting Sartoris published left Faulkner disillusioned with the publishing world, and soon following its publication, he claimed to shut the door between me and the publishers. This indifference to the publishing world allowed Faulkner to begin a more experimental style of writing and develop a very distinct sound. His next novel, The Sound and the Fury, exhibited the stream of consciousness style pioneered by James Joyce and later perfected by Faulkner. This style was lauded for its ability to capture the natural thought process of the human mind. Yoknapatawpha County, the fictional world in which many of his novels and short stories takes place, is nearly geographically identical to Faulkner's hometown of Lafayette County. This setting is home to a number of Faulkner-created families, which he uses their interactions with one another to examine the social and historical issues of the South, such as race, gender, aristocracy, honor, and sexuality. One interesting aspect of Faulkner's personal and literary life is his infamous rivalry with Ernest Hemingway. In the literary world, the two employed fundamentally different styles of writing, Faulkner using flowing sentences and verbose language, and Hemingway keeping things much more simple. Faulkner once said of Hemingway, he has never been known to use a word that might send a reader to a dictionary. During the last few years of his life, Faulkner was the writer in residence here at UVA. Over the course of his stay here, Faulkner gave several lectures and held open office hours. Near the end of his life, he donated a large collection of his manuscripts and letters to the university, which are now housed in the Small Collections Library. Faulkner's influence extends throughout the modern literary world. He was a major influence to Eudora Welty as well as any author who deals with themes of Southern society. Cormac McCarthy, Toni Morrison, and Gabriel Garcia Marquez all credit Faulkner as an influence on their own work. To this day, he remains one of the established giants of modern American literature. Not something that he had participated in or even remembered, except for the hearing, the listening, come to him through and from his cousin McCaslin, born in 1850 and 16 years his senior, and hence, his own father being near 70 when Isaac, an only child, was born, rather a brother than a cousin, and rather a father than either, out of the old time, the old days. Beginning the passage without a specified subject and without capitalization introduces the reader to the confusion that is to follow throughout the sentence and throughout the story. The multiple commas and inserted clauses further the confusion, as the sentence seems to lack direction. The omission of a period at the end conjures an image of a speaker trailing off of his rambling thoughts. The indication that the subject of this passage did not participate in or even remember the events being retold to him introduces the importance of familial legends. Although the subsequent story was not one that Isaac could tell himself from personal experience, it is one that retains a fundamental significance to him because of its importance to his family. The verb hearing, followed by a comma, and edited to the verb listening, highlights the distinction of the two words. The comma provides a natural pause as the speaker corrects himself and assures the reader that the action was much more focused than simply hearing. The subject was intently listening to his cousin, and the history of his family passed down to him. Presenting the subject of the passage, Isaac, so far along in the sentence, is somewhat jolting, as the reader is tempted to start over from the beginning upon learning what he expected to learn at the very start. Isaac's status as an only child further confirms the importance of his cousin passing along the familial history. The sentence presents itself like a puzzle, the jumbled pieces of which the reader must carefully put together. The introduction of Isaac's cousin McCaslin is significant in that the primary description of him is that he was born in 1850. Again, we see the significance of knowing the specifics of family history in this phrase. Additionally, we are finally given a period in which the story we are about to hear occurred, sometime in the 1850s. Given this period, the reader can form an image of the setting before the story is told. The conjunctive adverb hence primes the reader for yet another descriptive, likely confusing series of clauses. The adverb is preceded by a sufficiently confusing series of phrases and is followed by another overload of information regarding Isaac's father. The hence acts almost as a warning to the reader that the speaker has not yet concluded detailing the relationship between the subjects of the sentence. With the description of McCaslin as rather a father than either, the reader begins to understand the importance of the story McCaslin is about to tell his cousin. Isaac certainly looks up to his cousin as a father figure, and thus we can assume that he listens to the story as one coming from an authoritative source. Towards the end of the passage, we are given a less detailed but more descriptive explanation of when the story takes place, the old time. This wording implies a nostalgia for the past. The old time may not be a specific period, but is understood to be a significant epoch in the context of the family's history. At the end of the passage, we are provided yet another correction by the speaker. The old time becomes the more personal and more familial old days. The difference between time and days is important because it assures the reader that the story we are about to hear is not from a mysterious unknown past, but from a very familiar one in which McCaslin himself did indeed participate.